Welcome back. Let's look at that Professor Omar Attaran accusation one more time, made a year ago on Taliban TV, on the CBC. Roll the clip.
If these documents were released, what they will show is that Canada partnered deliberately with the torturers in Afghanistan for the interrogation of detainees. There would be a question of rendition, and there would be a question of war crimes on the part of certain Canadian officials. That's what's in these documents, and that's why the government is covering up as hard as it can.
Sorry, I think that's BS. If it's between an opposition-led $12 million inquiry where Stefan Dion himself read 19,000 uncensored secret documents, or a media hound professor who suddenly gets cold feet about answering my questions on the show, yeah, I think I know who to believe. But I want to be fair. I want to put to you Attaran's answers that he provided me in a series of emails over the past 3 weeks. And joining me now to work through these answers is Paul Chapin of the Conference of Defense Associations. Welcome, Mr. Chapin.
My pleasure, Ezra.
Now, I'd like to introduce you a bit more. You've spent more than 25 years in the Department of Foreign Affairs. You've served as an executive with the Pearson Peacekeeping Center. I mean, you've basically had a hand in military and peacekeeping and foreign affairs matters since I was a boy. Is that right?
For quite a long time, since I was a young man. I've never been in the military myself, but my profession of being a political military officer, which is kind of one of the subsets of being a foreign service officer, has had me involved with the Canadian military, the military of other countries for a very long time.
Well, thank you for joining us and bringing your expertise. What I'd like to do with you now, and you heard my opening monologue, and
yes, I did.
I think you're briefed on what I've said so far. I'd like to work through some of Professor Attaran's replies, and I would like you to comment on them. If you're skeptical, say so, and if you have an explanation, if you agree with them, say
sure.
so, okay?
Let's do that.
Let's do that. Here's the first one. This is a part of Omar Attaran's email to me. It says, reports by Canadian officials who visited Afghan detainees in an Afghan prison. Is there another part to this here? Several claimed abuse and had physical signs of it. Okay, Mr. Chapin, so basically Omar Attaran said that there were some Taliban prisoners who, in Afghanistan prisons, had signs of abuse. What's your response to that?
My response is that there's hardly any evidence to support that at all. There hasn't been any evidence since Richard Colvin first made his charges back about 4 years ago. There was no such evidence of wholesale abuse uncovered through any of the other processes that have followed, including the Parliamentary Committee inquiry, and all the documents that now have been vetted and released, vetted by 3 justices of the Supreme Court of Canada. What you have as a bottom line in terms of the level of abuse are reports on 2 cases. They go back to 2007. They were picked up in the documents that have been released, and they're pretty minor stuff. The first one, in fact, was sufficient to make people think about whether the processes were in place, and they put a temporary halt on the transfers to check into this particular case. It was a fellow who had been interviewed who said he'd been hit twice with a rubber hose. But the people who interviewed him said that he looked in pretty good shape, and he himself said he was in pretty good shape. There was no question of kind of systematic abuse. So another case.
So to me, that's the important point. I mean, I actually would be more generous than you. I would say I don't doubt that some Taliban terrorists held by in Afghan prisons were roughed up, but that's not what Professor Attaran accused the government of. He accused Canada of being partners in the torture and then covering it up. And I mean, I don't dispute that there may have been the odd Taliban prisoner roughed up by an Afghan guard, but to say that that's Canada complicit in war crimes, possibly, I think that's outrageous.
Okay, but Ezra, what I'm saying is that there's 2 cases on the files and all of the documentation so far, and that's it. And the second case was somebody who complained he'd been slapped 4 or 5 or 6 times. That's the evidence that's all the evidence so far.
And that's not a secret. That's been out for years.
And that's been out for years, exactly right.
All right, let's whip through a few more of Professor Attaran's replies. I'm very grateful to you for giving us some of the meat on the bones of those sources. Here's the next one. Here's what Attaran said to me. He said, my client has never ruled out disclosure And as I said, it is probably a matter of time, considering that he is now on military service. Well, Mr. Chapin, I'm wondering, I don't know who this client is. He's not letting Professor Attaran give any more details. But this sounds very fishy to me. Why would someone who claims to have evidence of war crimes go back to work in the war theater with the U.S. military? That's my hunch. What's your reply?
Well, my reply is this is just quite irresponsible. It's probably a thought that came to him off the top of his head while he was being interviewed. I don't know what motivates people like Dr. Attaran. But frankly, if it's serious, there's a process for it. If it's not serious, we should probably all try to do our best to ignore it.
Huh. All right. Here's the third thing that Professor Attaran said to me. He said, I am not the only one aware that Canada transferred detainees to the NDS for the expressly stated purpose of further questioning, rather than for the purpose of prosecution. So that's, again, transferring. Canadian troops would catch the Taliban, but instead of having Canadian trials, Canadian prisons and all that, we would turn them over to the Afghans, who would then have a prosecution of them. I don't find anything troubling about the fact that the Afghan government would prosecute people, and part of prosecuting them is questioning them. I find this a non-answer, and that's my view. What do you think?
No, I think it is largely a non-answer. If he's kind of alluding to the fact there's other people who know the secret that he doesn't want to divulge, I think it's incumbent upon him to give us a couple of these people to go after and talk to. But you're right. We're in Afghanistan to try to help rebuild a war-torn society and develop the kind of security regime there that it needs. That's prima facie evidence that things are not going right in Afghanistan, and a lot of things need to be fixed. One of the things we're fixing at great cost to the Canadian taxpayer is the criminal justice system in that country. They don't have many judges or lawyers. They don't know how to run prisons particularly well. And we've had our own judges and our own lawyers and our own people from Corrections Service Canada in harm's way in Kandahar doing just that kind of stuff. So you're right. You mentioned a minute ago that it's not a perfect kind of society, and people are going to get roughed up, and maybe even sometimes even more than that. But we're doing the best we can under the circumstances, and it's damn good that what we're doing right now.
All right, I just have time to put one more of Professor Attaran's answers to you. Here's what he said. He wrote to me, he said, it would be inconsistent with the duties of a member of the Law Society, that means a lawyer, to breach privilege for the sake of your TV show. Any allegation that I should have answered such questions would be inappropriate for you to make, particularly as you were a member of the bar yourself. So basically Attaran is saying, don't you ask me to reveal confidences. I'm a lawyer, I can't. And you, Ezra, as a lawyer, should know better. I'm not running a court or a trial here, Mr. Chapin. I'm just saying if a fella goes on TV and makes accusations, I think that it's journalistically and politically and perhaps morally incumbent on him to back it up when we have enormous evidence that now, through the Dion-led inquiry, that things are fine.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is he just trying to hide behind a technicality here, or is this a legitimate excuse?
No, it's not a legitimate excuse. It's entirely a technicality, and it's a pretty weak one. I could make exactly the same argument, Ezra. I've been in the government of Canada for 30, 40 years in various capacities. I'm privy to all kinds of secrets. I've got very high-level security clearance. If I wanted to, I could presumably have concocted a lame argument of the same line, saying, you know, I'm happy to come and talk to you on your program, but boy, we're going to have to stay away from this, and this. I mean, it's really nonsense, and I think we shouldn't take it too seriously.
Well, Paul Chapin, I really appreciate you joining us on the show today. I just want to close by saying, just 1 hour ago, I emailed Professor Attaran asking him yet again to come on the show, promising him he would have his last word as always. I would treat him with the same respect I treat all my interviewees. I wouldn't even wave a chicken finger at him as I've done to some interviewees in the past. He won't come on. My standing invitation to him remains. If he will come on to answer my questions, I'd have him on any time he wants. Mr. Chapin, thanks for joining us. Hey, folks, don't go away. After the break, we're going to switch gears and talk about